First of all, thank you to Nick Moon for inviting me along this evening. And I think it's fair to say that I wouldn't have been here but for him, because one of the things you learn at the BBC over many years is don't come to events like this if you can possibly avoid it, and particularly don't come to them if there are two young men who are anxious to argue with one another, because you don't get much thanks for standing in the middle. You just get the time. And then the second thing, of course, Nick didn't tell me that was going to be the format, and he also omitted to mention until sometime later that Dame Jill would be summing up after I'd spoken. Dame Jill, you may know, has recently conducted a look at an investigation into the use of statistics in the BBC, and probably knows more about the use of statistics in the BBC than anybody actually working for the BBC. So that's marginal. But you can imagine that when Nick mentioned to me that this would be the case, how delighted I was. So having said that, thanks Nick, deeply grateful. A few words, if I may, about the way in which the BBC approached the referendum and the use of statistics in the referendum. And perhaps a few words first about the way in which we approach referendums, because they represent a particular challenge for an impartial news organisation. Single issues, for some reason, lead to levels of passion, commitment, partisanship, one-eyedness, disagreement and argument, which seem to exceed those in a general election and just about any other election, although, it has to be said, we may just have witnessed an exception to this rule in the United States. It's not entirely clear why that is, but perhaps it's because of the apparent once and for all nature of the vote. You know, general elections can be overturned in 5 years' time, and so can other elections. Generally speaking, referendums, in theory, last for considerably longer than that. How does the BBC deal with referendums? Well, we have editorial guidelines which outline our responsibilities to report elections and contentious issues in an accurate and impartial way. And on the recommendation of Dame Jill, who reported in August to the BBC Trust, we'll be adding some general explanation of statistics in our output and adding some additional guidance on reporting statistics shortly. But we have the impartiality guidelines, which require the BBC to be duly impartial, to give due weight to the arguments. That's rather important. We have some accuracy guidelines, which require output to be duly accurate, which in the context of a referendum means reporting them accurately. We have some politics, public policy and polls guidelines, which specifically deal with coverage of elections of referendums, and we have a specific set of guidelines for each election and referendum. In this case, the referendum guidelines required a broad balance between the arguments. As it says here, due impartiality is not necessarily achieved by the application of a simple mathematical formula or a stopwatch, but the objective in a referendum with two alternatives must be achieve a proper balance between the two sides. Let me be clear that the referendum guidelines don't require that equal airtime has to be given to the arguments or their proponents, whether pro or anti, regardless of the facts, regardless of editorial judgment, and regardless of the expertise of the interviewee. The BBC's and the interviewer, indeed. The BBC's rules are clear. We have to deliver due impartiality and broad balance, terms designed to ensure that we're free to make judgments on the validity of stories, that we challenge facts and figures, that we acknowledge that different people speak with different levels of authority on any given subject. There was one kind of statistic, one set of data, which the BBC decided to restrict the use of during the EU referendum, and those were opinion polls. The voting intention polls during the Scottish independence referendum, the UK general election, proved significantly awry. As you know, an inquiry into the reasons for their general waywardness had to be set up by the British Polling Council and the Market Research Society, and indeed I came to learn its initial conclusions in this very building and this very room. And of course now the US opinion polls have proved significantly wrong in crucial states in the presidential election. In all cases I have mentioned, the polls had a significant effect on campaign strategy, and it can be argued that the polls may have had a consequent effect on the result. The BBC already has considerable restrictions on reporting opinion polls following a 1992 exit poll debacle. Some of the younger members of this audience may not know that the BBC was within a minute of announcing Neil Kinnock as the winner of the 1992 general election. His picture was already up in the studio and we were all ready to roll when a few of our statisticians said, just hold on a moment. A moment was all we had, to be honest. And we revised it, but not enough in the event. We didn't revise it so far as to predict a Conservative election. We had a massive inquiry into the exit poll situation at the time, and I'm glad to say that our exit polls have subsequently improved considerably. But we had some experience of it. So the BBC's approach during the EU referendum was to pay considerably less attention to the polling, not to create a poll of polls, and to offer audiences for the first time a distinction between online and telephone polls in our online poll tracker, which you can see up there. Interestingly, there was very little, if any, comment about this change of approach. Now, as we've already heard, the EU referendum has led to an unprecedented allegation and counter-allegation over the statistics used by both sides. The arguments have been accompanied by widespread assertions that we've entered a post-truth world fed by a diet of internet and social media exaggeration and falsehoods. But of course, it's not been unknown for politicians to use statistics selectively in the past, or indeed in the present. Just take a look at the current debate about health spending, in which the Conservative chair of the Health Select Committee has rebuked the government, her own government, for exaggerating the amount of new money invested in the NHS. It was ever thus. Remember the dispute over whether spending on flood defences had gone up or down under the last government. It illustrates well the contention of one of my colleagues that, though there are some exceptions, politicians rarely use figures to support their arguments that have absolutely no basis in reality. Whether spending on flood defence had gone up or down, depending on which years you were comparing, neither side of that argument was telling an untruth. They were just selecting whichever part of the truth best suited their contention. In my view, much the same happened in the EU referendum. The campaign saw a barrage of claims made by both sides. The Leave campaign made claims largely about the effect of EU membership, the claim that the UK would no longer pay £350 million into the EU coffers being probably the most contentious. We've heard that already. The Remain side tended to make claims about what would happen in the event of a Brexit vote, and in particular the macro and microeconomic effects of leaving the EU. The problem with much of the debate about the economy was that it was about forecasts, which has already been mentioned, more than facts. It was not a contest of hard truths, but an argument over the predictions of the future. So at various times we were told that a vote for Brexit would mean that GDP would fall, that public finances would deteriorate, that mortgage rates would go up, more specifically that house prices would decline by 18%. I wouldn't put your mortgage on that one if I were you. And that each family or household would be £4,300 worse off a year, and so on and so forth. All of these, some of these, or none of these may turn out to be true. Whether you believe these predictions or not may depend on the view you take of expert opinion. I gather some people had had enough of them partway through the campaign. Part of the BBC's duty of impartiality is to give a clear indication of the weight of opinion behind each view. So the BBC's referendum coverage was abundantly clear that big business backed Remain, as we've heard, and that the overwhelming weight of expert economic opinion advised people to vote Remain. Nonetheless, the BBC at all times should be open to those who may challenge a consensus. Not all such opinions stand the test of time. What is the BBC's duty faced with each campaign's factual claims in the context of a referendum? It's not, as some have suggested subsequently, to banish some facts or one of the campaigns to the outer darkness, a contention usually based on who's making the argument rather than the argument itself. The BBC's role is to enable scrutiny through to debate, to interrogate, to challenge, to contextualise and to analyse the claims made on each side of the argument. Of course, campaigners on both sides of the argument were offered the opportunity to cross-examine each other's claims, most notably in the big debate at Wembley just days before the vote took place. But that was one of a series of opportunities given to both campaigners and the public to test the arguments of both sides. And there were dozens of debates up and down the country on BBC local radio, national and regional television, as well as on the network outlets. And then we used reality check extensively on the news channel and in bulletins, constant reference to news bulletins. We know that reality check online was known about and used by our audiences more than ever. And the suggestion that by the Leave campaign that 350 million a week could be redirected from the EU to other spending was given the reality check treatment. Okay, that was up on our website for most of the EU referendum campaign. I think it's absolutely clear what it's saying. I think it's very similar to what was being said earlier by Full Facts. But we didn't just stop with the Leave side. The Remain sides claim that each family would be £4,300 worse off after Brexit was also scrutinised. The music doesn't change, I'm afraid. So I don't think either campaign was thanking us for doing that kind of job on their statistical claims, but any voter in the EU referendum who wanted to know what those statistical claims amounted to had at their fingertips an explanation of what those figures meant. And they also had them on the Full Facts website if they wanted to go there. Of course, that wasn't the end of our responsibility. There are many, many more of those that I could have shown you. Seemingly, I just happened to pick the two that I thought were most likely to come up. But we also, of course, had a responsibility to interrogate the claims that each of the sides was making. Here's Andrew Neil interrogating Nigel Farage in prime time on BBC One about claims that Turkey was just about to join the European Union.
One other thing before we move to the economy. Why have you been telling people that a vote to remain is a vote for Turkey to join the EU, and quite soon? Because although the Prime Minister has taken different positions in this, I give you that, it's official government policy that Turkey should one day become a member. But you and I both know it is not going to happen anytime soon.
Okay, well, let's just be clear about the Prime Minister, who has been the biggest cheerleader for Turkish entry since 2005.
And I put that to George Osborne, so we've done this.
Since 2005, and including March the 18th this year,
Indeed.
a European
and
Council
I put that to George
resolution in which they said they're
Right.
going to speed up the accession process.
Right.
I would add to that, because now he's pretending that he's got a veto. I mean, not that he'd use it, of course. And we're being told that Turkey... The Prime Minister said Turkey won't join until the year 3000. Right.
Well, he said on the current trend that would be the case.
So
when do
why,
you think
Prime
it will
Minister?
join?
So why, Prime Minister, does the British Embassy in Ankara, on its website today,
I understand.
boast quite clearly that they are working towards
That it wants Turkey to join. I understand that, but what I'm asking you is how quickly do you think it will happen?
Right. And could he also explain why the British government is paying over £1 billion
And I put that to George Osborne
in
too.
pre-accession aid. Why are they doing it?
Let me try for a third time.
2025?
Well,
2026?
let's look at that
2027?
timetable.
I don't know.
Turkey applied to join in 1987.
63 they first did, actually.
Yeah, but 1987 is the current membership application. It's 40 years old almost.
Yeah.
They need to qualify in 35 areas to be able to join. How many have they done so far?
Oh, 2, I think it is, or
One.
3. Yeah,
And it's in science.
But hang on,
They've made little progress in 14 areas. They haven't even begun talks in 20.
Whatever the campaigns may have made of their use of statistics, I think some very effective use of statistics from Andrew Neil there, who also conducted a number of interviews of that nature, both in prime time on BBC One and on his programme, The Daily Politics. But of course, all of these facts need context, and we did just a few days before the vote took place, we took the trouble to put out another programme which summed up the campaign so far, and again, took the politicians to task about a number of the ways in which they'd used their statistical claims up to that point. It actually looked at a range of statistics that have been presented. I play this clip just because some people have asserted that the BBC failed to make clear what the accurate picture was on 350 million or 4,300 and all of these sorts of things. And here's a programme right at the very end, in the last week of the campaign, with Nick Robinson telling you the truth about these things as he saw them. Oh. That's not Nick Robinson, is it? That's not Nick Robinson, that's for sure. Sorry, here we go.
As for me, I'll be trying to cut through the confusion and provide at least some of the answers. I'll be challenging claims made by both sides on the biggest issues: the economy, immigration and sovereignty. And I'll be providing you with the facts, telling you what are not facts, and also what judgments only you can make.
But hold on, there's something else to consider. Don't we pay an awful lot of money to be members of this European club?
The claim from the Vote Leave campaign is that we send to Brussels £350 million each and every week. There's only one problem with the claim. It's not true. Britain doesn't send £350 million a week to Brussels. Mrs. Thatcher got us a rebate, so that takes the figure down to £276 million a week. And it doesn't end there. If you then take off all the money that we get given back from Brussels, the figure goes down again to £161 million. The amount we send to Brussels each week may be a lot less than Vote Leave sometimes want to claim, but it's still an awful lot of money, adding up to £8 billion a year. Now, of course, if all those economic forecasters are right, any savings that you make by leaving the EU could be instantly wiped out simply because the economy gets smaller. So that is the judgment you need to make in the end. Is it a membership fee for a club that makes us all richer, or is it money that is simply going down the drain?
And there is, as I say, I can say plenty more where that came from. The squeakier claims of politicians in the referendum were challenged again and again by our presenters and correspondents. And if you want to doubt me, go back and look at Evan Davis taking on Douglas Carswell on Newsnight over the claim that voting leave would bring £350 million a week back into the coffers. Watch David Dimbleby take on Michael Gove's dismissal of the IFS report. Watch Andrew Neil pick apart Farage's figures on immigration as well as on Turkey, or Kamal Ahmed on the 6 and the 10 doing the same on a range of subjects and making it clear that the economic consensus is on one side of this debate. As we heard, it didn't actually make any difference. And I haven't mentioned programmes like PM, The World at 1, The World Tonight, 5 Live, and so on and so forth. I could go on. What the estimable More or Less on Radio 4, which did a whole edition devoted entirely to the facts and figures about the EU referendum. Now, I've shown you examples of coverage from both the beginning and the end of the campaign, but our research shows at the BBC that audiences in general don't engage with these kinds of votes until the very end of the campaign, the last couple of weeks. And that's why, if you wondered why, we concentrated so many of these big programmes on our main channel into the final week or so of the campaign. And some of the campaigns themselves were reluctant about the Wembley debate, but we were very clear that if you're going to engage people at the moment when they're making up their minds, this is not the people who've already done so. People who are making up their minds, you have to be late on in the campaign. Otherwise, you just don't give them the information when they most need it. I think in that context, the Electoral Reform Society's suggestion that the campaign period should be extended to 6 months, and I hear a collective groan from our audiences and indeed from this audience, should perhaps be seen in that light. You're not going to get people to focus, in my view, on the campaign any earlier by extending the campaign period for even longer. But I think the most important thing from the BBC's point of view, is, having shown you a few examples, is that if you just watched or listened to just one BBC programme or bulletin consistently throughout the referendum campaign, you would have been across the main factual claims and their substantiation or their shortcomings. If you'd accessed the online material, then you surely couldn't have been in any real doubt about what the facts really were. Whatever other mistakes we made in the campaign and reporting the campaign, and we always make mistakes in all the things that we do to a greater or lesser extent, I don't think that we made the mistake of failing to offer to the British public a measured, accurate, impartial view of the statistics that were being used in the campaign. And that's part of our job as an impartial and accurate broadcaster. In this instance, I think we did it reasonably well.